joining us this evening. It's really exciting to be back for an in-store event because we have been doing a lot of Zoom events, so this is particularly exciting. And we're here because we're launching Sara El Sayed's memoir, Muddy People. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, which I'm currently on, which is the Yagara and Turrbal people. And also, as we're live streaming tonight, I'd like to acknowledge the owners of the lands from which you're joining us from on Zoom. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Some housekeeping I'll just run you through. If you do need the bathroom, they're just in the shop and upstairs. Please leave your mask on for the duration of the event unless you are drinking, and just make sure your phones are also on mute. The bar will be open throughout and after the event. And then around 7:15, 7:20, we'll see how we're going. We will have time for a quick Q&A, so please save your questions until then. And for our people who are on Zoom tonight, if you do have questions, please just type them into the chat box. And then the host will pass them along to myself. And afterwards, we'll have Sara inside signing copies, and we'll have them for sale at the counter as well. And also lastly on Zoom, just make sure you are set to speaker view so that you can see us here tonight. So in conversation with Sara tonight, we have Melanie Saward. Melanie is a proud descendant of the Bigambul and Waka Waka peoples. She is a writer, lecturer and PhD candidate at the Queensland University of Technology. And she also taught me briefly when I did my master's in writing, editing and publishing. Please put your hands together for Melanie and Sara.
Hi everyone, it's so nice to see you all here, and I have the very great pleasure of chatting to my friend Sara El Sayed about her wonderful debut memoir, Muddy People. Now, in lieu of doing an actual bio for Sara was also my student. First year creative non-fiction, I believe. I taught her everything she knows. I can also sign her book for you if you like. But I hold the title probably of the only person who ever has thrown an Easter egg at Sara's face. And she always tells that story when we talk about how we met each other. Or she was my teacher, she threw an Easter egg at my face. So tonight I'm not going to throw any Easter eggs at your face, but I will ask you lots and lots of questions. But let's start by hearing a little bit from the book. Do you want to read a little bit for us? Sure. But I would like to introduce Sara to you and give her a big hand before she reads.
Wasn't prepared, I was. All right, so this is not the first chapter, but an early chapter in the book, titled Mama. This is how a conversation between my mother and her mother starts. My mother will be in the kitchen, and she will call, "Do you want tea?" Nana, who is in the living room, will not answer. My mother will call again, "Do you want tea?" Nana will not answer. My mother will call one more time, "Do you want tea?" And Nana will say, "Are you talking to me?" My mother has done this for as long as I can remember. "Have you been talking to your dad?" I ask her. "How do you know?" she says. "You've been emailing him." "He emails me. And I saw you got a text from Pa. Why are you looking at my phone?" "Do you reply?" "Sometimes." She stirs sweetener into her cup. The kitchen in the home we live in now is not the same as it used to be. There are things that she waited until Baba left to change. She has replaced the countertop. What was once a sweaty brown cork is now white marble. There is a new fridge that dispenses water, and the gaps in the stairs have been boarded up, the empty space beneath them made into a walk-in pantry. We sit at the dining table. Her laptop is open. She's looking at houses on the real estate website. She does this a lot. "I hate this house," she says. "I always did." In this house, we've been robbed 3 times. The first time, they cut a hole in the front window's fly screen, reached through and took my mother's handbag, which was sitting on the table nearby. Later that evening, a girl, drunk, and her friend, drunker, came to the door. They found a wallet, license, and various cards, and a small photograph of my grandfather strewn down the footpath. The drunk girl gingerly offered the stuff back to my mother. The cash and credit cards were missing. The second time, they stole Mohammed's bike. He parked it in the afternoon and it was gone in the morning. We suspected the neighbors. They kept odd things in their yard, like rusty chains and what looked like the bench from the dog park. The third time, someone jumped into our backyard, unscrewed the fly screen from the bedroom window, took it off the frame, and stole my mother's handbag off her bed. In the morning, we found the empty bag, which had been flung into the hedge outside our house. This was all when that bedroom was still my parents' and not just my mother's. She called the police after the first theft, but not for the second or third. She thinks police only waste time. She shows me a short list of houses, none of which she'll ever buy. She's trying to please everyone. Aisha will need to be near her school. She's in grade 9 and won't get her license for another couple of years at least. Mohammed will need a room big enough for his drum kit. Nana would like a place right on the beach, like at home in Agami. She wants a replica of the house she stays in when she goes back to Egypt each year. Nana is missing her house even though she's only just got back from her annual trip. Each time she returns to Egypt, she makes sure to visit our old flat in Alexandria, which is only 30 minutes by cab from Agami. She brings pieces of our former lives from our flat, drawings from our bedroom walls, photographs we've forgotten. Once she brought back a stack of letters in my mother's handwriting. She gave them to me to read while my mother was at work. There were 4 letters addressed to Pa, all marked return to sender. The first, when she got engaged, was an invitation to the wedding. She describes her fiancé as someone he would like, a Muslim man with strong values. The second was sent when Muhammad was born. You have a grandson now, she wrote. The third, when I was born, a granddaughter. And the fourth, meet Aisha. You can hate me, I don't blame you, but please meet your grandchildren. They are your grandchildren, nothing to do with me. My grandfather began contacting my mother after the death of his wife, the woman he married after Nana left him. He sent chain mail, mostly, or news things about the Egyptian president. He mentioned coming to Melbourne to visit the mosque he designed when he lived there. He said he had a Corvette, or maybe it was a Lamborghini, or something worth a mint. He wanted to know if he could send it to Australia for safekeeping. My mother told him that she didn't have room for the car, but he was welcome to visit. He just had to let her know when, so she could make sure Nana was out of the house. I wanted to come see you kids, said my mother to me. I wasn't sure I shared her enthusiasm. She told me he would come on 3 conditions. The first, she announced, is that I prove I'm a good Muslim. She said this as if it were reasonable, as if she could record herself praying 5 times a day and that would prove it. Or do a medical test. Surely the good Muslim gene was detectable in her blood. Hereditary, maybe. The second, she continued, is that my children be good Muslims. I rolled my eyes. And the third, she said, is because I'm a single woman now, she had told him about the divorce, I need to give him control of my finances. Oh, fuck off, shouted Nana from the living room. She could hear very well when she wanted to. When Pa dies, he's alone, his wife gone, none of his family in his life. His death is from cancer, in his colon, in his liver, and in his lungs. He had told my mother a couple of months earlier over text that he was going to have an operation to cut it out. I asked him if he wanted me to go and see him, but he said no, he was fine, and that it wasn't a big deal, she says. Nana is in Egypt when he dies, and various people at the hospital funnel information to her. The day before he dies, he's feeling fine and looks like he's improving, according to the people. My mother says this is common when someone's about to go. They perk up and look better than they have in weeks. It's a cruel trick of nature. Nana never went to see him because she hates his guts, but she cries for 2 days when she hears he's dead. I don't see my mother cry once. When I ask her if she's okay, she says she lost her father 30 years ago when he stopped speaking to her. She never uses the word disowned. When she finds out that he was using chemotherapy because he thought it would give him hepatitis. She's furious. If I had known how bad it was, I would have ignored him and I would have gone to Alexandria, she said. Nana visits his flat in Alexandria. She tells us it's full of empty water bottles, yogurt containers, and reams of unused paper. Nana thinks about donating the paper to the university. They probably don't need it, texts my mother. They use computers now. There are 20 jars of minced garlic in the fridge. That's what he thought was keeping him alive. His late wife's sister is at the flat too. She knows of a safe in one of the walls that holds her sister's jewelry, which my grandfather inherited. She believes it rightfully hers. She's looking for it, knocking on the walls to check if they're hollow. In the meantime, Nana wades through the rubbish, which is overwhelming. The only clean space in the house is his desk. On it, Nana says she's surprised to find a picture of my mother, teenage, when she was in boarding school, with big teeth and frizzy hair. She takes a photo of the desk and texts it to us. Later, she hears the sister of the late wife has gone back to the house alone. The next picture Nana sends is of a massive hole in the wall and an empty safe.
Reading, Sarah. I actually really love that you chose that section to read, because while your dad looms larger than life over the whole book, I think that your mum, and your nan of course, but your mum really plays an important role, and it parallels your own story in some ways. And I think that those more subtle aspects of her character shape your journey in the book. Can you talk a bit about the role that she plays in your story?
Yeah, I'd love to. That's right. I think because my dad is such a big character in the book, and he is in real life as well, so is my grandmother, we tend to not lose, but my mom is more understated. And that's how she is. She's this more soft-spoken, more reserved, stoic type of character. But she plays such an important role in the book and in my life as well, because she reflects what my future could be and shapes who I am as I grow up. And it was really important for me to include her the way she was in this book, because her life is so different in terms of places that we've lived and experiences that we've had. But she, to me, is part of me and I'm part of her. So it was just really important to show her story and the background between her father and their relationship and what that means for what happened to my relationship with my father. Like how do our mothers' lives shape our own lives? How do our relationships with our fathers parallel in this way? So it's really important and a big part of writing this book and writing my character as well.
Yeah, it's really striking when you read that extract where he's also laying out some rules for her in terms of coming back into her life, and your dad has obviously laid down the rules that have shaped the story here. You want to talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think it really shows the difference between our fathers as well, because even though I say that it's sort of, when I look at my mother and the relationship she had with her father, it's sort of potentially foreshadowing what could happen with me. But I think what I'd hope this book shows is the diversity of like the Arab dad, Muslim character, because they're so different, and I imagine them to be so different. Even the men in this book are as diverse as the women in the book as well, in terms of personality characteristics, the way that they treat their children. Like my dad is so loving and of his children, and I just can't imagine him doing the same things that my grandfather had with his child. So even though I did have those fears of potentially losing my father, it's very clear in respect that would never happen.
Yeah, I think so. It would be remiss of me not to talk about your dad, because he is such a big character, and like I have a very complex relationship with my own dad, who was very strict and had a lot of rules for me growing up. These rules were born out of conservatism rather than religion, though. And my friends are often surprised that we are so close now, despite how strict he was. Are you and your dad close now?
Totally. Yeah, me and my dad are very close. And like I said, he's so loving towards his children that it would be impossible not to be close. And I think, I mean, look, we think of these rules that we had growing up as strictness and conservativeness, but then as we grow older, we sort of come to understand why they existed. And even though, you know, some of these rules I wouldn't necessarily put in place for my own children in the future, if that was to happen, you can see the way in which their lives and their experiences shapes the way that they brought up their children. Like there's a justification, however messy and, you know, sometimes not entirely clear they're there.
Yeah, arguably, like it looks a little bit like in the book that he softens with the cancer. Would you say that's right, or do you think that that's something that comes all the way through?
I think that my dad's experience with his illness, and I think he would agree, made him reflect a lot on his faith and on and I think this comes with any illness as well, like what your priorities are. And I think that loving father figure was always there with him, but it just gave me, because he was so physically frail, that there was that extra level of vulnerability that allowed for him to open up a little bit more. He's always emotional, but it made him more open. I think that brought us closer.
Yeah, it feels like an awful question to ask you about how unique your relationship is with your dad compared to, say, how other Muslim fathers are maybe portrayed in the media and in books. And I know that you're pretty passionate about people of colour writing, being forced into boxes to be representative of their culture. And in many ways, I think people are saying in reviews that they see themselves reflected in your work, but then they don't see themselves reflected in their work and in your work. And I think you might have some stuff to say about that unique story that you've.
Yeah, and I think that's my favorite part of publishing this book, is seeing people review it and read it and see how they engage with the same characters, because everyone reads it in a totally different way, which is super interesting to me. And I love it when people say, oh, it's different from my experience, because I think Sara El Sayed wrote that first review that talked about how she didn't necessarily see herself in the pages, but it's sort of a testament to the diversity within our own community. And I think I'm happy that sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve, is that this isn't the Arab Australian Muslim story. This is a story about my family. So of course it's going to be impossible for me to reflect someone else's family or experience in this, because we're so unique, even though we're sort of could be broad brushed with this generalization of we're all the same, in the same way all Arab men are the same, aggressive, you know, patriarchal, that sort of thing. That my goal was to show my family and the way they are unique.
Yeah, I think it's nice to see the publishing industry maybe moving away from homogenizing all immigrant people of colour experiences, I think, and your book is really showing that. All right, I want to go back to Nan. Because when I got here, Phil said, Phil from the book you may recognise, said, is everybody in love with Nan? We are a bit in love with Nan. Yeah, but she plays a really important part as well in the story, and it's going back to your mum. I think your mum doesn't always say what you need to say story along, but Nana is the voice for it. Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it, you know, narrative technique wise now, that it works really well to have characters in my life, because my mum, as I said, she doesn't say a lot. Her, if we talk like love language, is that sort of generosity and kindness and making sure other people have what they need. She's not going to be like, oh, I love you, give me a hug. She's not that. She doesn't do that. And she won't say those things. Like, she doesn't say things. But my grandma is so loud, like outwardly, like she's a huge character. She's not here. I'm sure she's watching. I think she's got the thing to work age.
I
She set her
know.
up for the thing. Yeah.
We all love you.
She would be talking to things she did. But she sort of set that voice for my grandmother, even though they don't have the same opinions, same point of view. She allowed for those stories that are behind my mother to be known to me. The same, like in that chapter that I just read, those letters, like I would have never known anything about my grandfather and his relationship with my mother if it weren't for my grandmother telling me. I know against my mother's will or not, but the things you find out by talking to different people in your family and have the roles that they play in storytelling. It was really interesting writing process as well.
Yeah, that's great. So while we're on character, I don't know how many people are like me and who always consider the acknowledgements at the end of the book as important as part of reading the book. And if you've gotten to the end and read those, you might have realised that some of the characters in Sara's book, like her frenemy, Carly, are actually an amalgamation or a composite character, and they make up the events and things that many people have said or done over the years. It's an interesting choice, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you came to that decision.
Yeah. I came to that decision for a number of reasons. I think growing up, there were a lot of instances that were like conflicts, and they weren't necessarily perpetrated by the same person. I think when you're writing young people as well, because the story starts when I'm quite young, when you're writing young people, it's really hard to write them as a full, holistic character. And so I had to, for narrative purposes, combine those people so they came across as a whole person. That sounds bad, but like that's what you have to do. And also it's this sort of projection in both ways. Some of these people I still know, and whether or not they're in my life or still friends with them, is like I just don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with them being like, you bitch. I don't want to deal with that. So it was easier to preserve my emotions and energy to make characters like Carly the composite character. Characters like Jason, there are fewer people, but it was easier. It was easier and also helped in terms of narrative, because I can't write about every single person that did something. It just sort of helps to have that one symbol of that friend who didn't necessarily do the right thing at the right time. But also in saying that they were children, like they were kids, even up until teenage years. I mean, I'm sure I did things that when I was a teenager that I would regret or take back. So I don't necessarily want to put them full on blast, but I didn't want to not talk about those moments because they were important to me.
Yeah, it's really important to include those micro and not so micro aggressions that you experience. I think it's a really interesting way of dealing with that. Did it come while you were first drafting it, or was this something that came later on?
The
composite characters.
I think it came as I started to write. Like I would write the moments, and I initially had. So Carly was initially, she was always a composite character, but initially she was like 2 or 3 people, and then she became 4, 5, 6 over the course of time.
Tally up those microaggressions.
Yeah, and also my mate was like, I think we can. There's one very similar girl over here, and we can just combine them. I just think it helps in terms of allowing readers to understand the story as well, not having too many characters in there if they're very similar. So that came throughout the editing process as well. But I don't think it changes anything in terms of the meaning. I think it's just it just helps me, as I said, project myself, but also tell the story. But tell what's important about the story as well.
Yeah. So perhaps this is a really good place to talk about versus creative nonfiction. And now I know that, as I've said before, I was your tutor for your first creative nonfiction class that you took, and of course you were brilliant. But I wonder if you talk about how you balance that fact and the creative, because I think that there's other decisions that you have to make when you're writing a book like this.
Yeah, it was tough because a lot of the moments, as I say in the acknowledgements, are streamlined for narrative purposes. So it was about staying true to the essence of the moment, but also not getting too bogged down in too many of the details, because that can be really tricky. All of it happened in some way or another, but some moments might not have happened in that very exact time and place that they did. And I think that's the nature of creative nonfiction as well. You have some ability to move and shape the story in a way that's compelling to readers. But it's also really important to maintain that contract of truth that you have with your audience. Say, like, this is real, this happened. And I feel like I maintain that, but tell the story in a way that makes sense. Tell the story in a way that allows you to read those moments and experience those moments in a way that's not just like an information dump. Just like, oh, take it. This is all my story.
Yeah, you've got to make your readers experience it. And you've done that. You've certainly done that really well. I know that you had some interesting conversations with your family while you were writing the book about perspective, and it seems a little bit strange because I know that some of them are watching and Aisha's here, and I've already told you that Phil's here and Aaron's here. Do you want to have a little bit of a talk about some of those interesting conversations that you had and how all these people feel about being represented in your work?
How do you feel?
Pass the microphone.
It was a really interesting experience. With my parents, it was a little bit more involved because obviously they play a big part in the story. So it was all a matter of talking to each of them and making sure at least they knew what I was going to write about. But I always had to remind and tell them that this is my perspective. So there might be moments where they say, oh no, I should have included this as well, or I think this or whatever. But it's all about my perspective, and I think it was really hard because it was a bit tricky because my parents are divorced and they don't necessarily always see eye to eye on everything. Just balancing and being fair enough to each of them. That was something that I was really conscious of. I didn't want either one of them to be upset by things that I wrote, and I hope that they're not. They haven't told me that they're not. When my dad read it for the first time, I was really anxious, but he loved it. So that was a big relief. It was just a matter of managing their feelings, but also just reiterating the fact that it's, even though I write about them, this is essentially my story. Even though they play big parts, this is my story. I'm telling sort of the story of myself through how I see them. They reflect me. They're on board with that. So I think those are the most difficult ones. In terms of everyone else, I don't know if I showed Aisha. I think I ran her past the draft past her.
There's a great scene where Aisha goes to the dance.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. I was a bit stoked to actually meet Aisha.
She's not a big feature, but she just definitely makes an impact. She was like, I liked it, but I should be in it more. Obviously my brother and my sister play characters in there as well. And they each play their own part, and their personalities are so different. I don't think my brother's read it though. I'm not going to say what's in the acknowledgements. No. But if you click to the acknowledgements, there might be clues in terms of telling you how much she reads. But yeah, with my friends, I think I flagged it with you very early on. But are you okay?
I read that description. I'm
Okay. And Aaron has been reading it through the drafting process. He's been my first reader for every single chapter. So that's like, he knows everything that's in there. Yeah, it's just been a nice experience to see people, or like with my mum, for example, one of her reactions, like when she like read the book, she's like, oh, I didn't know that you felt that way. Like there's some like things that I don't necessarily share with your parents. I think that's goes for any child, that you don't always reveal your deep and darkest feelings and thoughts to them. But yeah, I guess I'm glad that it was as much an experience for them as it was for me.
It's easy for me to sit here and ask you questions about them, because to me they're characters in a book that you've brought to life. But how do you feel about like answering those questions on behalf of them as though they are characters when they are real people in your life?
I think the easiest way to answer them is as if they were characters. I mean, like they are. And the book shows parts of them. Like I couldn't possibly capture their entirety because they're human beings. So I think that's also helped me write the book and justify publishing this book, is that yes, we get a glimpse into who they are as people, but also it's incomplete, like would never be complete, characterization. And I accept that. I think they accept that as well. So yeah, it's weird, but also yes, I do think of them as characters. As I think of myself as a character as well, and I think giving myself that nickname and going with that nickname for the whole book really helped me remove myself from the writing, so I could write more honestly. Because when I write myself, oh, Sara did this, Sara did that, became really hard, and I got too much in my head, and it just felt really cringy. So I just had to give myself a little bit of space. Yeah.
Potentially becomes a bit more like a diary, or maybe too expositional for those of you who are our students in the audience. So something that struck me about the story is that it is very Queensland, like very Queensland. And I don't really think that we see that a lot in Arab Australian writing that's published at the moment. I think we get a lot of Western Sydney narratives. I think maybe I'm going back to that uniqueness question again, but do you want to talk a little bit about like how important Queensland stories are, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really different. And I think you're right, it sort of things that we were talking about before, and that there are some readers who don't necessarily relate or see themselves reflected. And I think that's natural because we all grew up in different places. And I'm glad you think that it's very Queensland, because I wanted it to be distinct in terms of place as well. And that was the critique that I got in my undergrad units, where I wrote.
It wasn't for me.
No, it wasn't for me. But it's honestly, it was true though. It was like, the story is great, characters fantastic. I have no idea where it happens though, no sense of place. So I'm very glad that there is a sense of place in this book. So I really wanted it to be reflective of Queensland, but not too overt either. I didn't want to be like, I don't know what's on Queensland. Yeah, I just wanted it to be reflective of this place because it's different, it's unique.
Yeah, and I think those reading interstate or watching interstate, there's enough there for you to get a good sense of place. But for those of you who are from Brisbane, and I spent many years in the Redlands as well, so
Scary baby faces here.
Yeah, knew exactly what you were talking about there, and Hervey Bay as well. And I think you're painting a picture of maybe in books that we read about Brisbane, they're set in West End, and we can all picture West End, but we've got a Redlands narrative here, and we've got Hervey Bay. So I think those things are really strong. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about how you look after yourself, because you're writing creative nonfiction. You are a person of colour in a country that is deeply racist, and you're about to go on your publicity trail. How are you going to look after yourself and deal with those questions that are going to come across? And can you think about that in terms of giving advice to any of the budding writers in the audience here who might need to protect themselves?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would block and ignore.
Always good advice.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully I haven't gotten anything too terrible yet. But you know, like it happens. Like from either side, I think that it could happen. The fact that, like you say, a younger brown person, Muslim in Queensland, that has happened before, and it can happen again. I'm expecting it. I think that honestly, I think that's the best advice, just to block people, and also just like to not answer stupid questions either. Like I was at the Sydney Writers Festival earlier this year when they went in such a terrible position, where people get up and sort of say things to particular Arab writers on the stage, and they're like, that's not really a question. It's not a question. They just have something to say about. So just like I'm hoping, I want to try and build that confidence to sort of just like block people out, not say engage. I think that takes too much energy. It's not worth it. So yeah, just don't be too tempted to engage with people who have to say silly things.
Mm-hmm. It feels horrible that it's a question that I feel like I have to ask actually. And it feels awful to hear say that are expecting it, but I guess the reality is both of us know as women of colour that these things do happen. Yeah. I hope that it doesn't happen for you. Okay, so I know that we've got a lot of writers and budding writers here in the audience. You've given lots of good advice, I think. Do you have any advice for them in terms of approaching creative nonfiction memoir specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone I talk to, I'm like, oh, you should write a book. So I did. I think, and this is advice that's been said over and over again, and I think it's really old and cliche, but don't underestimate the power of writing what you know. I think often as young writers, we get really bogged down in wanting to create these new worlds and fantasies that really excite us, but the story that you know the best and that you're an expert on is the one that you've lived. And I think that the stories that we know, like when we write what we know, they're the best stories. Whether it's set on Mars or whether it's set on Earth, when you're writing from your own experience, that's the most compelling. And that's what's the most believable. And I can try and write something out of my own experience. Like recently, I wrote a scene for a piece of fiction where one of my main character gives birth, and the feedback I got is it's just not really, it's not convincing, because I mean I thought it was convincing, but it's like, and I was sort of like, once you go through that process, if you ever do go through that process, you look back on this and realize that it's not real, So it's like even things like that where you think that you don't know. Writing requires a lot of research, and when you're first starting, why not write about the things that you've researched the most yourselves. So yes, don't be afraid to draw from your experiences, because I think they're the most compelling, interesting stories.
That's a beautiful answer. I hope everyone QT creative writing was making notes right now. Who inspires you, and what memoirs do you like to read? Or do you like to read memoirs?
I do. I read a lot. You inspire me.
That's what I was fishing for, of course.
Honestly, I'm inspired by lots of people, and particularly my QT friends includes Mel, Rowan, Alex, Emily. All of these people who are like literally here in Brisbane writing and doing amazing things. I think that's the most encouragement that I can get, is that we're here and we're creating stories that we know, and they're fantastic. Of course, I'm inspired as well by Arab Australian writers across Australia. Michael Muhammad Ahmed, Melanie Saward, who just published her first memoir as well, which is utterly gorgeous, devastating. Sara El Sayed, all these people who I've been able to connect with because of writing. Like it's just been such a lovely experience for me, and creating that community that's been so important to me as I've gone through this process of publishing my first book. Yeah, it's just been amazing. Loved it.
a nice community that we know that lifts each other up and celebrates successes, which many communities don't do, unfortunately. Did you always see yourself as a non-fiction writer? You talked a bit about writing a fiction scene.
Yeah. I think my fiction is always inspired or based on real characters. So my fiction, the next book I'm writing is based on and inspired by my grandma's life and her parents. So it's always been based on the things that I've seen and stories I've heard from my family, whether they're fictionalized or not. And that's sort of how I came to start writing memoirs. And I was writing these stories and realizing that they were true, like they had happened.
Yeah.
So you just, you know, it was what was most natural for me. And so I feel like I'll continue to that whether it's fiction or not.
Great, and you answered my what's next question for you, which is great, and I'm sure fans of Manor everywhere will be really excited to know that there's more coming if it is fiction. I think with the book that there is actually lots of room to make it longer. You know, perhaps more focus on your adulthood.
Season 2.
Yeah, season 2, the impending nuptials and so on. Perhaps a story about doing creative writing at QT and having achieved a writing story to get there. Do you think there is another memoir in you?
I think so. I think that, I mean, the events that happened at the end of the book were happening as I was writing the book, because I got halfway and my editor sent me this email being like, do you know how you're going to finish? Good question. Like it just happened that way, and I think it works well. It gave me the ending that I needed. But those events are still very close to me in terms of time and emotionally very close. I still haven't sort of processed everything. Sharon hasn't processed everything. So it's just, I think I just need like some time from it to be able to reflect on it and write about it in an interesting, like compelling way. So maybe in future, like I say, season 2. Coming soon.
Just for the audience, start thinking about your questions. I'm going to ask Sarah a couple more, and then it's your turn. I've lost my place. I think it would be remiss of me to not talk about the royalty situation. So for those who haven't finished reading the book or haven't seen the publicity around Sarah's book, she's chosen to not take royalties from the book. Is that right?
Yeah, so the royalties that I receive from the Australian version of this book will be donated to Palestinian causes.
Yeah, I think that's important and admirable. Many people maybe would not have done the same thing in your position. So I think, you know, it's a really good thing to do.
Oh, thank you. And the reason why I chose to do that is because, like I said in the book, that there is a history of Arab voices across the world being silenced, you know, erased. And so it's sort of impossible for me in a way to write this story and be happy that my voice is out there and find that when there are other voices within our Australian communities, Palestinians who don't get that same opportunity. And that's why I chose to do it. And it's also a really important issue for me and my family. Like I discussed this with my family and we're all on board. So something that you're grown up with is that, you know, you learn Mama, Baba, in Free Palestine. So that's sort of like what we know and what's important to us. So
Yeah, thanks for talking about that too. Okay, we might take questions from the audience now.
And just a reminder for everyone on Zoom, just to type them into the chat box. I might not pass the microphone around because sometimes there's a bit of feedback with our speakers, but who would like to go first? Guys, everyone's shy. I'll go first. Where can I get those earrings? Oh, cheeky monkey jewelry. If no one can see out the back, she's got Muddy People book earrings, and they're incredible. And then I was also wondering, and apologies if this was spoken to while I was briefly inside, but I was wondering if you could talk to the book's title.
Oh,
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, cool. So it has a couple of different meanings. The first was inspired by this moment I had with my dad when I was very young, and it was in Egypt, and we were walking through a park, and I started screaming like, "Sunny, sunny, it's sunny, it's sunny!" And he was like, It's not sunny, it's raining. Like, what are you talking about? And I was pointing at a puddle, and he says, "Oh, you don't mean sunny, you mean muddy. Like, you got your words mixed up." Because I was a child, but also growing up bilingual, is that you mix your words up. So it was sort of like that metaphor of we say one thing and we mean another one. And it's sort of like this conflict between like what we see and what we understand. So that was one, muddy. But also like a reference, maybe a crude reference to our skin as well, like being called like muddy skin color, brown person. And yeah, so that's why I chose Muddy People. Sort of has that double meaning.
Questions from the audience? Yes.
So your book covers quite a vast chronological time. Was there any particular times where you enjoyed like reminiscing or certain events? What was like the most favorite portion of the book to write?
A deeply thoughtful question too.
I enjoyed writing all of it, I think. It was just really nice to be able to reflect on my memories in such like a intimate way. I know that sounds weird because like your memories are intimate to you, but it's sort of like reflecting on them, understanding them, and pulling the meaning from them. That was really, really enjoyable for me. Sometimes it was really hard because it was emotional and difficult and uncomfortable, but that's not to say that I didn't find the process really helpful and enjoyable. Yeah, of course, writing about you was good.
Age did you come to Australia?
I was 7 when we came to Australia, so I was just starting. I started grade 2 here. Yeah.
Yes.
What's your relationship with Egypt like these days? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ron. I haven't been back since I was 15 years old. That was just before the Arab Spring. And I remember always wanted to go back to visit because my grandma, before COVID, would go back every year. But after 2011, my parents were like, "Oh, probably not very safe to travel." So it's sort of like this distant memory for me. And but like Aaron bought a game the other day, which was like a flight simulator. But it's based on like there's Google Maps and you just fly. I think you can fly in real time, which sounds really boring. We put in my address from where I lived in Egypt, and we flew over it, and it just made me cry. I don't know why I was crying. Like he was like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "It's just really like emotional to see the place that you like were a child in." And
Really low resolution.
it was low resolution. Like it was like I don't know. I just cried, which is weird. But yeah, I think it's just sort of like it's far away in many ways for me, but you want to go back. Like I want to one day go back and submit. Also for language as well, because like I say in the book that over the time like growing up here, I've sort of lost my ability to speak Arabic, and my dad still speaks Arabic to me because it's his first language, and I understand it fully, but I don't reply in Arabic. I reply in English, and it's sort of this thing where you feel this weird like shame and guilt for not doing it, and this discomfort. And I think maybe Aisha feels. I don't know if you feel that as well. And she was so young when she moved to she was 2. And so there's these moments when he might say something in Arabic, and I wonder if Aisha picks it up as much as I do. And my brother obviously picks it up more than I do. which is sort of like this sad feeling that we're losing something that's getting further and further away from us. So I'd really like to go back to
Book 2.
season 2.
Was there another question out the back there? Yes.
How do you go about writing emotional scenes and approaching it with your family, like being able to tell them first, like pre-warning them before?
Yeah, I got different advice when I first started writing the book, and it depends on how you like want to approach it. Some people say, "Oh, consult every step of the way," and some people say, "Write the first draft and then talk to your parents." And I find the second to be the best way because, like, if you show them every single chapter or moment, then you can get really bogged down with their opinions and thoughts. And so I wrote the whole thing, and then I went through each chapter with my parents, and it was a different experience for each of them. So I had the full manuscript, one for each of them, and then with my dad, it was like, okay. At first, I'm like, this is the general idea of what this chapter is about, but then he would start like reading. But my mom was different. She was like, I don't like. She's like, just give me the general gist of it, and we went through it that way, and that's how she approached it. As I said, she's pulled back. My dad's very into it. So yeah, that was the process of sharing it with them. And I think I didn't want to talk. We didn't talk about it too much. I just let them read it, let them know the general idea, because I don't think it's necessarily true to our relationship to be able to talk about these things. Like, oh, this is how I felt about boys. It would be like, stop. So yeah, that's how I approached it.
Also, as you were saying, that it's your story ultimately and not theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then off the back of that, I was wondering, I know you spoke about making a nickname for yourself to create some distance. Did you have to actively stop yourself from kind of making scenes more glossy than they actually were in real life?
The glossy in terms of like more like surface.
Yeah, making them seem maybe not as bad or maybe severe as they were.
Yeah. At some points I did, to protect the people that were in it as well, because some of the stories are obviously not my own. If they're my family members, things happen to them that I don't necessarily feel that I have the right to tell. I try to avoid those. But yeah, I think I just really tried really hard to stick to my perspective and things that they had told me, like not to infer things from them and their experience. Things that they had told me in the past and how that's shaped me and how that's, how can I pull meaning from that moment, and how can I reflect that in who I am becoming. Yeah.
I might just grab the mic.
We've had a few questions come through on Zoom. So Sarah asks about your writing routine. She says, do you have a routine and how do you fit it into your life?
Yeah, this is going to sound bad because I tell students all the time to have a routine, like write a routine. I am really bad at that because I don't have like a particular time of day that I work really well. Sometimes it'll strike me at like 7 p.m. where I'm like, yeah, I have a good idea and I'll write. Sometimes I write because I have to and I have a deadline. So I'm really bad at it. Sorry, I'm really bad at it. But I get it done. Like if I can give myself a deadline, it's okay, I'm gonna have to have this finished by this time. And having an editor really helps with that because they're like, where is it? Yeah, so I try my best, but I don't necessarily have a routine. I would like to think I had a romantic, like, in the mornings, get up and sit on the balcony and write and stare at the trees. But I don't, it's really bad and very stressful for Aaron as well. It's very sad. Like, I always get very stressed and like I'm gonna miss my deadline. I always wish that I had extra time. So if I could recommend having a routine, I definitely would. But I just don't have myself.
Yourself.
Yeah, no.
And you started writing and you also didn't have an ending, which is something the teacher is not recommending that.
We've got a question from Jackie, and she says, do you feel like there is one of your characters that you'd like to investigate more in another non-fiction book, i.e. does one character's story scream out more?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple. I think with my grandma's story, that's one that I'm definitely invested in telling through fiction, the next one. But I also think that my mum's story is worth exploring further as well. Like I said, she doesn't come across as pronounced as the other characters in this book, but she has such a complex history, and she's such like this. To me, she's like an absolute hero, and I would really love to have the chance to write something like that would allow her to stand out as much, you know, as other characters have stood out. Yeah, so maybe in the future, right? Yeah, to write that story.
Do we have any more audience questions here? Yes.
So how much did the editor change? How much investment did they do in the first draft that you gave them?
I'll just repeat the questions for people on Zoom because they've just told me that they can't hear. So that question one was about how much did the editor impact and kind of change the manuscript along the way?
Yeah, I had a good relationship with my editor in that she would give me advice, but I was also open to hearing my perspective as well. It was never like, oh, here's what I think, this is what we're going with. It was sort of that relationship where we discussed why she thought changes needed to be made at particular points and allow me to understand it, but also give my opinion and say, oh, actually, I feel like it's better this way. So obviously there were things that because they're experts as well in writing, so you sort of need to have that moments where you compromise. But I think that I think I was relatively lucky to have an editor that was willing to, like, she listened to me and understood what I needed and understood what I wanted this book to be. And so that was really helpful in that process. So I don't know, it's sort of hard to quantify how much she changed. I wouldn't say she changed anything. I think it was sort of more of like a discussion of, here's what I write, of how can we mold this to make it more streamlined, or, you know, cut bits that, I cut quite a bit. I have quite a few chapters that even before I showed my editor that I thought didn't fit. So I think it was sort of that combined effort of making those decisions together.
I probably have time for one more question.
Just on the editing, did your first attempt, you know, your first joining with an editor work, was your editor the first and only editor that you went with?
So that question again was about the author-editor relationship, and she was wondering whether the first editor you met, it was a great relationship straight away, whether you needed to kind of shop around for an editor.
Yeah, no, my editor was in-house editor at Black Ink, and she had worked on Growing Up African in Australia, which was the anthology that I was published in before, which sort of led to this. And so I knew her already, and she was really lovely, so it was really nice to be able to work with her again. And so I already felt comfortable from the beginning, so I didn't necessarily need to, you know, do any shopping around.
Yeah. And last bit, can you tell us if there is, or what the difference is with, you've got creative non-fiction and what I've been hearing just recently, ficto memoir. What's the difference?
So for those on Zoom,
fiction memoir.
That was what's the difference between creative non-fiction and ficto memoir?
I don't know. I mean, like, I can make an assumption that ficto memoir might be more inspired by real life events, but takes this more creative life.
It could be. It could be auto-fiction. There's a lot of auto-fiction coming out at the moment, which is like autobiographical fiction.
But with an autobiography, is more a full life as opposed to a memoir being a portion of life. But I just thought the QUT might have had some understanding, or, you know.
No, maybe we have to add it to
I think so, yeah. I think like telling stories, like, it exists on like a spectrum, and then people borrow from fiction and borrow from real life in different ways at different levels. So maybe it's just one of those that exists more closely to the fiction end of the spectrum. I'm imagining. I don't know.
That's all we have time for. Do you have any final words you'd like to say?
No, but I would like to congratulate Sarah on her absolutely brilliant book. If you haven't bought it, we're in a bookstore, so please go and buy it. And Sarah's going to be signing, right?
Yes. Yeah. We'll have Sarah at the front of the shop, so you can go grab your copy from the counter and then go get it signed and say hi. I just have to say thank you both for coming. It's so exciting to have an in-person event, and congratulations on your incredible book. If we could all give another round of applause for Sarah and Melanie.
I'll still take you inside. Oh, really? Oh, I'm so well.